Pastor Dave here, and thanks for joining us for another Faith Group series, David, a man after God's own heart. I have to admit, it's a bit flattering and embarrassing to have an entire faith group about me, and it's a bit overblown to call me a man after...
Hey, it's about the Bible, it's about David.
It's about the Bible, David. Better update my notes. We'll just have to edit that part out. Welcome to another Faith Group series, David, a man after God's own heart. It's a study of David, the biblical warrior, the poet, the king, a shepherd, a giant slayer, an adulterer, and a deceiver, a man after God's own heart, and a man in need of God's mercy. Author Eugene Peterson observes that we know more about David than any other person in the Holy Scriptures. We have an account of his life in 1st and 2nd Samuel. We have another perspective in 1st Chronicles. And then we have the unique insight of his thoughts and his feelings, his joys and his fears, and his steadfast faith through his poetry. 73 of the 150 Psalms are attributed to David. And while he probably did not write all 73 of those, he probably wrote a great deal of them. And because we have so much knowledge about David and so much insight into his life and his personality, we also have a lot of opportunity to examine our own lives. David's variety of life experiences and the diversity of his thoughts and emotions that we are privy to intersects in myriad ways with our own lives, which gives us an opportunity to examine our own experiences through David's experiences. So we've chosen 6 of David's experiences and coupled them with life lessons that we deal with every day, which we hope will spur some great discussion for you. So let's get started. And let's start this first session with David's call. But first, a little bit of a poll for you. Which of these books would you rather read? Would you rather read this one or this one? Yeah, I'd probably want to read that one. Or how about this one or this one? Yeah, again, I'm going to go with that one. And I don't know about you, but you know, we know that old adage, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. But it's hard not to, isn't it? Well, the call of David is the perfect example of the pitfalls of judging by appearances. At the time of the story, Israel was being ruled by its first king, King Saul. Saul had a great cover, right? He had a flashy cover. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2 describes Saul as a handsome young man. In fact, it says that there was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. He was a head taller than anyone around him. He looked the part. But he struggled to play the part. And though he reigned for 40 years, his reign was marked with struggle, both internal struggle and external struggle. He was rash and impulsive. He went his own way and disobeyed the Lord. And so by chapter 15, the Lord had rejected Saul, and he set his eyes on another. Well, the prophet Samuel was depressed in his old age. The king had anointed him, the king that he had anointed and set above Israel was looking like a failure. But in 1 Samuel chapter 16, the Lord reassures his servant. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel?" Fill your horn with oil, the Lord said, and go. I will send you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And so it was that the great old prophet Samuel came to backwater Bethlehem. Now imagine if the President of the United States, and you can fill in whatever president you like, came to visit Hutchinson, Minnesota. Well, it would be the talk of the town. And the town buzz becomes a frenzy when it's revealed that Samuel's visit is not just a cursory visit. Rather, he's here to anoint the next king of Israel. And he's going to Jesse's house. That makes sense, the people must have thought. Jesse's got some great boys. There's Eliab, the oldest. He's tall and he's strong. Or maybe Abinadab, the second. He's not as tall or strong, but he's book smart and wise. Or there's Shammah. He's loved by all. Well, the kingly resumes of Jesse's oldest boys were impressive. And they seemed qualified. So that even the old prophet Samuel was taken by their apparent qualities. And as he assessed Jesse's oldest son, Eliab, the prophet thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But then God stepped in. And God's not impressed with the same things that we seem to be impressed with. Height and handsomeness just don't impress him. Hadn't he learned that lesson with Saul? The Lord doesn't care about shallow qualifications that we tend to fall for. He doesn't pay attention to celebrity status or social media followings or political parties or clever slogans or the myriad of other things that easily impress us. And so he instructs Samuel, and he instructs us. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Well, one by one, the sons of Jesse pass by Samuel. And one by one, despite looking the part, the Lord rejects them. Aren't there any more? The prophet asks. Well, there's the youngest, Jesse said, but he's out tending the sheep. Now notice, we don't even get David's name here. We don't get it actually until the end of the story. Instead, he's just referred to as the youngest. The Hebrew word here is hakatan. The word's meaning goes a little bit beyond the youngest. It might better be translated the baby brother. It's a condescending title. He's the hakatan, the insignificant one. That's why he's just out watching sheep. That's why we didn't even bother to call him in for the king tryouts. Well, Samuel insisted, call him in. And when the hakatan comes in, described as ruddy, with beautiful eyes and handsome, well, for the Lord, it was love at first sight. Arise, anoint him, for this is he, the Lord instructs. Now, of course, it wasn't David's pretty eyes that were attractive to the Lord. It was David's heart. Way back in chapter 13, when King Saul's disobedience causes the Lord to reject him, Samuel declares to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your king over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue." And then he declares, "The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. God wasn't interested in appearances. God was interested in character. What kind of man was he? What kind of heart did he have? That's what made him a good king. That's what makes the insignificant significant. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And finally, we are told the name of this anointed one. He is not Hakatan. He is David. It's a name that means beloved. This is where the David story intersects with our story. Eugene Peterson says that the power of this story comes when the reader or the hearer realizes something essentially Davidic about himself or herself. In my insignificant, sheep-keeping obscurity, I am chosen. I am beloved. He says that David was, in our dismissive and condescending terminology, just a layperson. But David is the basic biblical rebuke to the minimizing adjective, just. You are not just a layperson. You are not just a youth or a senior or a parent or whatever minimizing term that you define yourself or hide behind. You are chosen and you are beloved. And yet, when it comes to character, well, can we ever measure up? When it comes to character, does David even measure up? I mean, sure, he's described as a man after God's own heart, but we also know him as a man after Bathsheba's heart. Yeah, he was a brilliant warrior, a renowned king, and a passionate worshiper, but he was also a distracted husband, and he was a deadbeat dad, and he was a power abuser. I mean, some of his sins make Saul look good. And what about us? Even those with an upright and moral character slip up. None of us are righteous, not one. We strive to live obediently. We strive to be lights in this world. We strive to love our neighbors as ourselves. But we're not very good at it, are we? At least not with any consistency. I mean, think about it. Many of the heroes that we look up to have dark sides of their own. From David to Martin Luther, who wrote terrible things about the Jews and demonized his opponents, to Martin Luther King Jr., who was rumored to maybe have affairs. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Even those with good character have bad characteristics. And that's why it's important to remember, as we immerse ourselves in David's story, to remember that the David story anticipates the Jesus story. Not only is David the first king in the line that leads to Jesus, but as we learned from David's call, Jesus' ascent to his throne was just as unlikely and unlooked for, and maybe even more so. Born to a peasant girl and a carpenter, placed in a manger of all things, his throne a cross of all things. Jesus' lifestyle and appearance cries out as an insignificant one. And yet Jesus' work and his identity establish him as the significant one. Jesus truly was a man after his Father's heart. Jesus truly was a man of character. And having been crucified with him, we now possess his character. As Galatians declares, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So as we immerse ourselves in David's story, may we see, in a sense, our story. And even more than that, the story that leads to Christ's story. For that is what God is up to in choosing David. And so we'll end with a psalm by David the shepherd, writing about his own shepherd, who took him from watching sheep and anointed him to shepherd his people. It's David's most well-known psalm. In fact, it might be one of the most well-known passages of Scripture in all of the Bible. It's Psalm 23. David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So there you have it, the call of David, a man of character. I hope you have some great discussions. Again, thank you for joining us in this faith group series. Talk about this amongst yourselves, and we'll see you in church.